On the second floor of a white colonial-style house in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, Emma Collins stood before the mirror. Her wedding dress, made of pure white silk satin, gleamed beautifully in the soft morning light. Her features remained as pure and lovely as they had been during her school days. Her long chestnut hair was elegantly pinned up, and the pearl necklace inherited from her grandmother Eleanor glowed gracefully at her throat. Gazing at her reflection in the mirror, Emma took a deep breath. Memories of her high school days spent with her grandmother in this very house 15 years ago came flooding back. Back then, she never could have imagined that a day like today would come, especially that she would be united with a man named Marcus Bennett. A gentle knock on the door echoed through the room, and as Emma turned around, her mother Linda entered. Linda had just rushed over from New York, and the fatigue from her journey still showed on her face. A former beauty consultant, her mother always wore perfect makeup and was dressed in a Chanel suit. However, this morning her expression lacked its usual confident smile. "Emma, you look absolutely beautiful," Linda said, placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder with a complex expression. "But are you really sure about this? There's still time to reconsider." Emma gently took her mother's hand. "Mom, I'm happy. Marcus is a wonderful man. But that scar..." Linda's voice grew quiet. "People will stare. A woman as beautiful as you should have other options. You're a successful doctor, surely there's a man more suitable for you." Just then, light footsteps came up the stairs, and her sister Jessica burst into the room. Jessica aspired to be an influencer and was dressed in perfectly applied makeup and the latest designer dress. "Good morning." Jessica greeted cheerfully, but her face quickly clouded over. "Honestly, today's wedding isn't Instagram-worthy at all. It was so hard explaining it to my friends." "Why?" She lowered her voice. "Why are you marrying a man like that? That facial scar is just awful." Emma smiled quietly. Her family's reaction was exactly what she had expected. 3 years ago, when she had told her family about her relationship with Marcus, they had reacted the same way. Her parents and sister focused only on his appearance and never once tried to learn about his character or achievements. "You don't know anything about him," Emma answered calmly. "Marcus runs an animal rescue shelter. He's saved hundreds of animals so far. And underprivileged children visit the facility too, learning love and compassion from him." Linda shook her head. "That's wonderful, but think realistically. Marriage is also a practical decision. Social status, financial stability, and public perception, all of these things matter." In Emma's heart, the words of her grandmother Eleanor, who had passed away 5 years ago, echoed, "True love is found with the heart, not the eyes, Emma. And truly important people appear when you need them most." Her grandmother's warm hands still supported her heart even now. From downstairs, her father Robert's quiet voice could be heard. "Linda, Jessica, please come down. I'd like to speak with Emma for a moment." After her mother and sister left the room, her father quietly entered. Robert, who had worked as an accountant for many years, was always a quiet man who took neutral positions. He stood before Emma and looked at his daughter with gentle eyes. "Emma, I'm glad to see you looking so happy," Robert said, taking his daughter's hand. "Your mother and sister are worried, but I trust your judgment. I can see in your eyes that Marcus is someone special to you. That's enough for me." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. "Thank you, Dad. I have a special reason for being united with him. I think everyone will understand someday." Robert smiled and kissed his daughter's cheek. "Today is your day. Be proud and be happy." Outside the window, the church bells had begun to ring. Emma looked in the mirror one last time and quietly pressed her hands together toward her grandmother's photograph. St. Margaret's Church was known as the most beautiful stone church in the Cleveland suburbs. The building, with over 100 years of history, was filled with colorful stained glass light streaming through Gothic arched windows. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as the church bells rang solemnly, guests arrived one after another. Emma's colleagues, fellow pediatricians, sat in the front seats, and warm smiles appeared on the faces of those who knew her character. Meanwhile, relatives from New York sat in the back rows, whispering among themselves. "Emma is such a beautiful girl," her Aunt Margaret whispered, shaking her head. "Why did she choose a man like that? That facial scar is just too." Her cousin Cindy, sitting next to her, agreed. "When I saw the photos on Instagram, I was honestly shocked. It's like the fairy tale Beauty and the Beast. Emma could have found someone so much better." However, on the opposite side of the church sat people with a completely different atmosphere. The staff from Marcus's animal rescue shelter, Hope Harbor, and local children and their families who participated in the animal interaction programs at the facility. Their faces overflowed with genuine joy and gratitude. 8-year-old Sarah was speaking quietly to her mother. "Mommy, is this Uncle Marcus's wedding?" "Yes, Sarah. Marcus is marrying a very lovely woman," her mother Carol answered. "You remember, don't you? Last year, when you found that lost kitten, how gently Marcus took care of it." Sarah nodded happily. "Uncle Marcus is like an angel for animals. I don't mind his facial scar at all. Because his heart is the most beautiful." When the organ music began to play, the entire church was enveloped in silence. When Marcus Bennett stood before the altar, a murmur ran through the venue. The man dressed in a black tuxedo indeed had a large scar running from his left cheek to his jaw. However, his deep blue eyes held gentle strength and kindness. Linda and Jessica exchanged glances from their front row seats. The mother took a small breath and whispered loud enough for the relatives nearby to hear. "In person, it's even more than the photos showed." At that moment, the church doors opened and a special guest appeared. Charlie, a golden retriever that Marcus had rescued, walked slowly down the aisle with a white satin ribbon around his neck, carrying the wedding rings on a small cushion. The well-trained Charlie walked straight toward the altar and sat at Marcus's feet. Small cheers arose from the children sitting in the back half of the venue. "It's Charlie. Amazing, what a good boy." Genuine smiles spread across the faces of those who loved animals. However, the relatives in the front rows looked puzzled. "A dog in the wedding?" Aunt Margaret frowned. "What kind of common sense is that?" However, 12-year-old Tommy stood up and explained quietly to those around him, "Charlie came with Marcus when I was hospitalized after a car accident. When I was scared and crying, he stayed with me the whole time. Thanks to Charlie, I was able to walk again." Tommy's mother, Susan Williams, nodded while wiping away tears. "Marcus came to the hospital 3 times a week during my son's treatment. He provided animal therapy programs free of charge. My son's recovery is thanks to Marcus and Charlie." The atmosphere in the venue gradually began to change. Testimonies from people who knew Marcus's character spread like small ripples. Betty McDonald, a facility staff member, spoke to an unknown woman sitting next to her. "Marcus came to this town 3 years ago and opened the facility. Until then, there was no animal rescue shelter in this area. He invested his entire fortune to save hundreds of animals. He works from morning to night every day and has never taken a day off." "But what about that scar?" the woman asked quietly. "I don't know the details either," Betty smiled gently. "But I'm sure it happened when he was helping someone. Marcus is someone who always puts others before himself." The organ music rang out loudly, and everyone stood up. The church doors opened again, and Emma appeared, arm in arm with her father Robert. Dressed in her pure white silk satin dress, she looked truly angelic. However, her eyes reflected only the figure of Marcus standing at the altar. Walking slowly down the aisle, Emma looked around the venue. Her mother and sister's tense expressions, the confused faces of relatives, and the shining smiles of children sitting on the opposite side. This contrast was exactly what she had expected. The moment her eyes met Marcus's, a relieved smile appeared on his face. Seeing that gentle smile, Emma was convinced once again that this man was truly worthy of being her life partner. When Father Robert entrusted Emma's hand to Marcus, he said quietly, "Please take care of her. She's my precious daughter." Marcus nodded firmly. "I will definitely make her happy." Father Johnson began the ceremony solemnly. "Beloved friends, today we have gathered to bless the marriage of Emma Collins and Marcus Bennett. Marriage is when two souls become one. It is not about appearance or status, but about understanding and supporting each other's hearts. As the priest's words echoed through the venue, Aunt Margaret, sitting in the front row, was looking at the innocent smiles of the children behind her and thinking deeply. And she began to sense something special in the gentle gaze Marcus directed toward Emma. The time for the vows was approaching. The entire venue was enveloped in silence, and everyone's eyes were focused on the couple at the altar. Emma's heart was beating violently because she intended to tell her family and all the guests about her true relationship with Marcus at the reception afterward. Charlie wagged his tail slightly, as if blessing the couple's love. The grand banquet hall of the Cleveland Country Club was beautifully decorated for Emma's wedding reception. Tables with white linen tablecloths were adorned with bouquets of sunflowers and white roses that Marcus loved, and the warm candlelight elegantly illuminated the entire venue. Nearly 100 guests were seated, waiting for the bride and groom's entrance. When Emma and Marcus appeared hand in hand, applause rang out. However, there was a clear difference in the warmth of that applause. Heartfelt congratulatory applause came from the animal rescue facility staff and local families, but the applause from relatives who came from New York was formal and somehow cold. Once they were seated at the main table, dinner began immediately. Gentle conversation flowed through the venue, but Emma's mother Linda began whispering quietly to her sister Margaret, who was sitting next to her. "That scar really is unsightly," Linda said, glancing sideways at Marcus at the groom's table. During the photo session, he was trying to hide the left side of his face, wasn't he? Poor Emma. To have to look at that face for the rest of her life. And Margaret agreed. Yes, indeed. Emma is such a beautiful girl. She's successful as a doctor, she could have had countless opportunities to meet better men. I wonder what she was thinking. Jessica, who had been listening to the conversation, joined in with a giggle. I think so too. Honestly, he must be the ugliest man in this town. I can't even show his photo to my friends. It's embarrassing to post on Instagram. Jessica lowered her voice further and continued, yesterday, the woman at the hotel front desk even sympathized with me, saying, your future brother-in-law, how unfortunate. Everyone thinks the same thing. Why would Emma choose someone like that? Linda nodded at her daughter's words while looking around. Indeed, she could feel similar gazes from other tables. Especially among friends who had come from New York, she could hear voices questioning Emma's choice. But I can understand Emma's feelings to some extent, Linda said with a complex expression. It's probably out of sympathy. She's been a kind child since she was little. She might have been moved by a man who helps animals. But sympathy and love are different things. Jessica laughed again. She's really such a goody two-shoes. But marriage is also a practical matter. What will she do if they have children? Those facial genes. Jessica. Linda stopped her daughter, but inwardly she was thinking the same thing. At that moment, on the opposite side of the venue, a completely different conversation was taking place. Betty, who worked at Marcus's facility, was talking to a group of local housewives sitting next to her. Marcus is truly a wonderful person. When he came to this town 3 years ago, the first place he visited was the children's home. He offered to provide animal interaction programs free of charge. Elementary school teacher Carol Smith nodded. Children from my class have visited the facility several times. It was truly moving to see especially introverted children open their hearts through interaction with animals. Dr. Emma also first came as a volunteer at the facility, Betty continued. When you see the natural smiles they have when they're together, you really think they're a perfect couple. Meanwhile, at the main table, the time for speeches was finally approaching. The master of ceremonies stood up and approached the microphone. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the speeches you've been waiting for. First, we'd like to hear from the bride's mother, Mrs. Linda Collins. Linda stood up with a tense expression. The speech she had prepared expressed love for her daughter while being somewhat distant. Words like Emma has been a kind child since she was little. Today, I'm proud of my daughter as she begins to walk a new path in life, continued in a safe, non-committal manner. Next, several friends and colleagues gave speeches. Emma's dedicated work as a pediatrician and the gratitude from patients' families were spoken of. However, few people mentioned Marcus, and when they did, it remained superficial. At that moment, Emma quietly stood up. The master of ceremonies looked surprised. Usually, a speech from the bride wasn't scheduled. "Everyone, may I have a moment of your time?" Emma's voice echoed throughout the venue. "There's something I really want to tell you all." The venue suddenly fell silent. Linda and Jessica looked at their daughter with anxious expressions. Emma took a deep breath, looked at Marcus, then turned back to the guests. "My husband, Marcus Bennett, is the most wonderful man in the world." Emma's voice was calm but filled with conviction. A murmur arose in the venue. Especially those who had been making negative comments about Marcus's appearance looked confused. Emma continued, "Some of you may have questions about Marcus's appearance. Specifically, about his facial scar." Linda and Jessica's faces began to turn pale. They were becoming anxious about where Emma was heading. "Today, I want to tell you all how that scar came to be." Emma's voice was trembling, but her determination was firm. 15 years ago, on a summer night, I nearly died." Shock ran through the entire venue. The guests gasped and fell into complete silence. Marcus also looked at Emma with a surprised expression. "That night, I was on my way home to my grandmother's house from the library. When I walked through a dark alley, I was attacked by 3 men. I was 17 years old. I couldn't run away, couldn't call for help, it was a desperate situation." Emma's voice caught for a moment. The people in the venue were drawn into her words. At that moment, a young man appeared. He was 19 years old and didn't hesitate to try to help me. He faced 3 large men with his bare hands. Marcus's expression changed. Distant memories began to resurface. During the fierce fight, that young man was cut on the face with a blade. Even so, he continued to protect me. And after carrying me to a safe place, he disappeared. The atmosphere in the venue completely changed. Expressions of understanding and shame appeared on the faces of those who had been criticizing Marcus's appearance. "I spent 15 years searching for that benefactor. My grandmother said, 'You must find him and repay your debt.' And 3 years ago," Emma looked at Marcus, "we had a fateful reunion." Linda and Jessica were completely speechless. The surrounding relatives also began to understand how shallow their judgment had been. "Everyone," Emma's voice gained strength. "My husband's scar is proof of his courage and love. Because of this scar, I'm able to stand here today. And this scar is evidence that he is the man with the most beautiful heart in the world." The entire venue was enveloped in a wave of emotion. Many people had tears in their eyes. Especially, the children were moved to tears with pure emotion. Marcus stood up and walked toward Emma. His eyes also gleamed with tears. "It was you," his voice was trembling. "That beautiful girl from that time was you." Emma took a deep breath. Holding Marcus's hand, she was about to open the door to memories that had been sealed for 15 years. Everyone in the venue was waiting with bated breath for the words to be spoken next. "Let me tell you in detail about that night." Emma's voice was trembling but filled with determination. "It was July 15th, 2009, around 9 o'clock in the evening. I was at the town library about a 10-minute walk from my grandmother's house, working on summer homework." Emma looked around the venue. Her mother Linda and sister Jessica were watching their daughter with pale faces, and the surrounding relatives were also listening with bated breath. The library's closing time was 9 o'clock, so I stayed until the very end studying. On the way home, I planned to take my usual route through Main Street. But that night, the road was blocked due to streetlight construction. Marcus's expression changed. Fragments of distant memories began to slowly resurface. "I had no choice but to take the dark alley through the back streets. Looking back now, it wasn't a road a 17-year-old girl should have walked alone. But my grandmother was worrying and waiting, so I wanted to get home quickly." Emma paused for a moment and gripped Marcus's hand even tighter. It was Old Mill Alley, a lane leading to an old factory site. There were hardly any streetlights and no pedestrians at all. As I was walking, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, 3 men were chasing after me. The mothers in the venue looked anxious, imagining if their own daughters were in such a situation. At first I thought it was a coincidence. But when I quickened my pace, they did too. When I started running, they started running too. And I was cornered in a dead-end alley. Emma's voice began to tremble. The fear from that time remained vividly in her heart even 15 years later. All 3 were obviously drunk. The biggest man approached me saying, "What a pretty little lady." I desperately screamed for help, but no one was there. At that moment, I truly prepared for death. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes. The memory was coming back vividly. That night, he had been on his way home from finishing work at a nighttime construction site. "That's when it happened," Emma continued with tears in her voice. Suddenly, a young man appeared from the darkness. A low voice rang out, "Get away from her." The 3 men surrounded the young man, saying, "Don't interfere, kid." The children in the venue, like the adults, were listening with serious expressions. Especially, the children who had been cared for at Marcus's facility felt even greater respect for their hero's past. The young man was about 19 years old. Compared to the 3 large men, he was small in stature and unarmed. But without a moment's hesitation, he told me, "Hide in a safe place," and then faced the 3 men. Emma looked around the venue, speaking especially to her family. A fierce battle began. The young man seemed to have some knowledge of martial arts and fought well at first. But one of them pulled out a hidden knife. He said, "Let's finish off this kid in one blow." Linda covered her mouth with her hand, and Jessica began to cry. They were finally beginning to understand the true meaning of the scar they had mocked. The young man tried to avoid the knife, but because he was fighting while protecting me, he was cut deeply from his left cheek to his jaw. Even though blood was flowing heavily, he called out to me, "Are you okay?" Marcus had completely recovered his memory. The pain, fear, and above all, the memory of fighting with the single determination to protect the girl before him came back vividly. But he didn't give up. Despite his injury, he continued to fight and finally drove away the 3 men. And even though he was about to lose consciousness from blood loss, he carried me to a safe place. Emma paused for a moment and took a deep breath. "My grandmother and I took him to the hospital. The doctor said, if it had been a few centimeters off, it would have been life-threatening. We visited him every day for 3 days. But on the day of his discharge, he had disappeared. We couldn't get his contact information or even his real name." Many people in the venue were crying. Especially, the relatives who had made negative comments about Marcus's appearance were filled with deep shame. "My grandmother told me, Emma, that young man saved your life. You must find him someday and repay your debt." Her last words before she died were about that too. Emma looked at Marcus. Large tears were flowing from his eyes too. "And 3 years ago, a man appeared at the hospital where I had started working as a pediatrician, carrying an injured stray dog. At that moment, I was certain. He was that young man from that time." Marcus stood up and turned toward Emma. "Emma," his voice was trembling with emotion. "It was you. You were that beautiful girl from that time. You probably didn't remember. My hair was short then, I was injured, and I looked completely different," Emma smiled. "But I never forgot your kind eyes, not once." Marcus held his head. "Why didn't you tell me? For these 3 years, all this time. At first, I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want you to date me just because I was someone you had saved. But as we spent time together, I truly came to love you. Your kindness, your love for animals, your dedication to children. I was convinced that you had the same beautiful heart as the young man who saved me that night." The entire venue was enveloped in a whirlwind of emotion. The children from the animal rescue facility stood up and applauded, and local families watched the couple with tears in their eyes. Marcus hugged Emma tightly. "I will protect you for the rest of my life. I'll fulfill the promise from that night, this time until the very end." At that moment, a small voice echoed from the back of the venue. Sarah had left her mother's hand and come forward. Uncle Marcus, Sarah said through tears. You really are a hero. Your facial scar is a medal of courage. When these words echoed throughout the venue, everyone stood up. Thunderous applause erupted, and voices saying, "Bravo," and "Wonderful," filled the venue. Linda and Jessica stood up crying and walked toward Marcus. Linda said in a trembling voice, "Marcus, I was the worst mother-in-law. I judged you only by your appearance and didn't even try to see your true value. Please forgive me." Jessica also apologized with her face crumpled from tears. "Brother-in-law, I'm truly sorry too. You are the most brave and beautiful-hearted person I've ever met." Marcus warmly accepted his in-laws. "That's all in the past now. From now on, let's move forward as a real family." The people in the venue were speechless with emotion. Aunt Margaret murmured, "To think such a beautiful love story exists," and Cousin Cindy wiped away tears saying, "I've been taught what true love really is." The Master of Ceremonies also said with his voice choked with emotion, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a true love story. Let's give Emma and Marcus another big round of applause." The entire venue was once again enveloped in applause. Amidst this, Marcus and Emma quietly gazed at each other. After 15 years, their circle of destiny had finally been completed. Charlie also wagged his tail and nestled at their feet, as if blessing them. In a corner of the venue, Grandmother Eleanor's photograph was displayed, seeming to watch over the couple with a gentle smile. Epilogue, 1 year later. 1 year later, at Emma and Marcus's new home in the Cleveland suburbs, their weekly family dinner was being held. In the living room where the fireplace danced, comfortable laughter echoed. Charlie, as always, was relaxing on the sofa as a member of the family. "Marcus, that roast chicken looks absolutely delicious," Linda called out from the kitchen. Since the wedding a year ago, she had changed as if she were a different person. Now she volunteered at Marcus's animal rescue shelter, Hope Harbor, twice a week. "The time spent with animals has taught me true joy," she often said. At the dining table, Jessica was talking excitedly. "Sister, this month's Instagram post got an amazing response. The photo from the Disability Support Facility activity got over 30,000 likes." Jessica's social media account had taken a major turn after the wedding. She had shifted from superficial beauty and fashion posts to messages about social contribution activities and inner beauty. Her post, "A True Beauty Lies Within the Heart," was influencing many young women. Thanks to Jessica's activities, donations to the facility have increased too, Marcus said gratefully. "Your influence is truly wonderful." Father Robert was quietly smiling while watching the family. "A year ago, I never could have imagined this. Spending such warm family time together." At that moment, Emma returned from the kitchen. Her face had a special glow. "Everyone, I have an important announcement." Marcus looked at his wife with concern. "Emma, what is it?" Emma took her husband's hand and smiled. "We're expecting a baby." After a moment of silence, cheers erupted. Linda rushed over with a kitchen towel still in her hand, Jessica jumped up and hugged her sister, Robert quietly wiped away tears, and Marcus gently embraced Emma. "Congratulations, Emma," Marcus's voice trembled with emotion. "To think that you and I will have a child, it's like a dream." Linda said tearfully, "This child will surely be special. Born from parents filled with love and courage." Jessica continued excitedly, "I'm going to be the most wonderful aunt in the world. And I'll teach this child from the beginning the importance of judging people not by appearance, but by their hearts." After dinner, the family gathered in the living room before Grandmother Eleanor's photograph. In front of the photo were letters from animals rescued at Marcus's facility and drawings from children. "Grandma," Emma spoke quietly to the photograph. "Just as you said, I was able to find my benefactor and repay my debt. And that person became my life partner. Next spring, your great-grandchild will be born." Marcus also pressed his hands together toward the grandmother's photograph. "Grandmother Eleanor, thank you for raising Emma. And thank you for bringing us together." Linda looked around at her family and said, "We all learned something important on that wedding day. We who were caught up in appearances and social expectations came to understand what true value really is. Jessica nodded. I changed too. Now pursuing inner beauty is much more fulfilling. Outside the window, the sunset was beautifully coloring the sky. Charlie stood up and headed toward the children playing in the yard. The children who visited Marcus's facility had now become like part of their family. Marcus, Emma gripped her husband's hand. I want to teach our child the same courage and kindness that you have. And I want them to have a heart filled with love like yours, Marcus replied. The family sat in a circle and quietly spent time in gratitude. The foolishness of judging people by appearance, the meaning of true love, and the importance of family bonds, the lessons learned at the wedding a year ago were still deeply etched in their hearts. Charlie returned and lay down in the center of the family circle, as if protecting this happy time. Grandmother Eleanor's photograph smiled gently, illuminated by the firelight. Emma placed her hand on her belly and thought, I'll tell the child born next year this beautiful family story. I'll teach them what true beauty is, what true love is. And that people should be judged not by appearance, but by their hearts. The family's laughter continued to echo through the warm home.